Would it surprise you to know that prisoners, disabled, mentally sick, and poor children were all once considered as a group of people to be used as subjects in unethical and cruel research experiments? In this video, we will be talking about such psychiatric experiments that crossed all the limits and what happened as a result of that. So, stay tuned and enjoy the video. The Bobo doll experiment. At the beginning of the 1960s, Stanford University psychologist Albert Bandura, who is widely regarded as one of the greatest psychologists of the 20th century, conducted an experiment to see if it was possible to learn violent behavior through observation. In Bandura's experiment, nursery-aged children were made to observe an adult physically and verbally attacking a plastic doll. Bandura then observed the behavior of the children when left alone with the doll. Surprisingly, the children followed the behavior Bandura had made them observe and started attacking the doll verbally and with great ferocity, even hitting the doll with a mallet. The experiment was controversial because it involved essentially training children to attack without provocation. And also, the experimenters were unsure what would be the long-term consequences of the experiment to those children. The Little Albert Experiment. John Watson, a famous behaviorist, conducted an experiment in 1920 to see if a baby could be conditioned to have an irrational fear. In the experiment, 8-month-old boy Albert was introduced to a white rat, and it was observed that the boy showed no sign of any fear. Watson repeatedly reintroduced the rat while making a loud noise such as the aggressive banging of an iron rod to make the baby fear it. Once he had firmly anchored the association with the rat, little Albert started bursting into tears at the sight of even a brief glimpse of the rat, with or without the loud noise. Watson did not stop there. He also demonstrated the transferability of learned fear by making Albert fear rabbits, dogs, and even Father Christmas. Watson never revealed the true identity of Albert before his death, but researchers tracked down his studies and found several different candidates, including one who hated dogs. The monkey drug trials. While it may seem that humans are given every right to do anything in the pursuit of scientific advancement, it is sometimes sad to hear things humans do to animals in the name of research. In the late 1960s, University of Michigan researchers conducted several studies examining the effects of illegal substance addiction on primates. The researchers injected large amounts of various drugs into the monkeys to see if they would eventually self-administer the drugs. Many of these monkeys developed severe addictions to the drugs and continued to self-administer them until death. The study continues to be critiqued as it is uncertain how much of the results could be extrapolated to human behavior because of the fact that the monkeys were removed from their natural environment and placed in a restricted and foreign environment. The Pit of Despair. Maternal separation and clinical depression is a Harry Harlow's experiment to investigate the relationship between mother-child separation and clinical depression. Harlow conducted an experiment at Wisconsin-Madison in which baby monkeys were separated from their mothers and placed in small, isolated cells. The baby monkeys rapidly developed severe depression. They ceased to play, ceased to communicate, and in some cases, even began to starve themselves to death. The experiment was highly criticized from an ethical point of view, as it was well known that baby monkeys develop strong maternal bonds and remain with their mothers for much longer than most other mammals. Not only did the experiment appear to be inhumane, but for many, the conclusion that depression was inevitable was also widely accepted. Harlow's experiment did, however, demonstrate the importance of maternal-child bond and interaction. The Milgram experiment. In one of Stanley Milgram's most notorious experiments, participants were asked to give an electric shock every time the learners got the answer wrong. The participants were then told to increase the voltage before they could ask another question. The participants thought that they were part of a study about some learning methods, but they were actually part of another study. The real study was to know how willing someone would be to inflict pain on another person after being told by an authority figure to do so.
I'm responsible for anything.
Some of the participants are actors, and the shocks aren't actually given. However, most of the participants were real, and they found that participants were willing to give a shock of up to 450 volts, even though the learners were screaming in pain. The actors didn't actually suffer any real harm. But the real participants who gave the shocks were under extreme stress throughout the experiment and were profoundly affected afterward. The Stanford Prison Experiment. In 1971, Philip Zimbardo, a professor at Stanford University, recruited 24 male volunteers to study the psychology of prisoner abuse. The participants were divided into two groups, prisoners and guards. Zimbardo played the role of the superintendent and built a mock prison with barred doors, jail cells, and guards. The prisoners were arrested at home and taken to a local police station where they were fingerprinted and photographed. They were then blindfolded and taken to the prison where they were stripped of their clothing and dressed in prison garb. Some of the guards were deeply influenced by their role and began to abuse the prisoners within a few hours. The guards verbally abused them with insults, whistled at them to wake them up, sprayed them with fire extinguishers, and made them perform pointless tasks. The guards also took away their beds and forced them to sleep on a concrete floor. After 5 days of abuse, Zimbardo was forced to interrupt the experiment prematurely. Many of the prisoners suffered severe emotional damage due to the experiences they had inside the jail, curing homosexuality. When we look back at history, we see many attitudes, ideas, and beliefs that most of us wouldn't be comfortable with today. One of the cruelest yet most popular ideas was that homosexuality is unnatural and should be cured. Various attempts were made to develop treatments. Some of these treatments were well documented, including one published in British Medical Journal in the late 1960s. In the study, researchers tried to treat a group of gay men. The men were presented with both men's and women's suggestive images. When the men saw images of women, they were told to look freely and not to be punished. When they saw images of men, they were given an electric shock. The study was to teach men how they should see a man and a woman. However, the scientists were unable to get the required result, and as a result, they were forced to drop the research. Unsolicited gender reassignment. David Reimer was 6 months old when his parents brought him to see John Money, a professor at Johns Hopkins University and author of one of the most famous psychology studies of the time. Reimer's parents had botched a circumcision procedure, leaving him with disfigured genital damage. Money, a professor in the Department of Medical Psychology and Pediatrics, was a proponent of gender neutrality, arguing that gender identity was learned socially from an early age. Money argued that while Reimer's genitals could not be fixed, he could and should be surgically altered and raised as a woman. In 1967, Reimer underwent the procedure that would transform him into a girl with the name Brenda. Despite several visits over the next decade, Reimer never truly identified as a woman and continued to live as a man till the age of 14. He then went on to receive treatment to undo this sex reassignment. However, the ongoing experiment caused him extreme depression, which was a contributing factor to his suicide in 2004, and John Money, on the other hand, became a controversial figure. UCLA schizophrenia medication experiment. In 1983, psychologist Keith H. Nuchterlein of the University of California, Los Angeles, along with psychiatrist Michael Gitlin of the UCLA Medical Center, initiated a now controversial study of the mental processes associated with schizophrenia. Specifically, the researchers were interested in the ways in which schizophrenia patients relapse. To do this, they had a group of hundreds of schizophrenic participants who had been taking medication for the condition and made them stop taking medication. While the research may have yielded important findings about schizophrenia, critics have argued that the experiment did not adequately protect the participants in the event that their schizophrenia symptoms returned, nor did it clearly define the point at which they should be retreated. What is more, this had tragic consequences in 1991 when former program participant Antonio Lamadrid killed himself by jumping from 9 floors up, despite having been open about his suicidal state of mind and supposedly under the study's watch. The Monster Study. In the late 1930s, Professor Wendell Johnson of the University of Iowa and his master's student Mary Tudor wanted to see if speech difficulties could be improved by changing what the children were told. They also wanted to see if it was possible to create speech difficulties in someone. To do this, they would lie to healthy speech children by telling them they were having speech problems. Once this false diagnosis was given, they would tell the children that they had to correct their poor speech and not speak unless they thought they could. The scientists were not very successful at improving speech, but they were very successful at negatively affecting healthy speech. The children who were told they had speech problems were very self-conscious, spoke very little, and were extremely frustrated. Some were afraid of some letters and words, while others refused to speak at all. Some also had behavioral tics like snapping their fingers or covering their eyes or shaking their head. Many of these children suffered lifelong psychological harm because their symptoms were unable to be reversed. If you like psychiatric histories, you can't miss this 10 unbelievable cases from psychiatric hospitals. Thank you for watching the video, and if you like this video, please press the like button and subscribe to the channel for more videos like this.